us to start?
This was more academic for me than for them.
Right.
Right.
Did you mentor judge? I judged. Yes, I judged the last set. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Andy Fellows. I'm a faculty research specialist at the College of Information Studies here at the University of Maryland, and welcome to our panel presentation as part of the Info Challenge 2022. I'm going to do very little moderating. I'm going to say almost nothing. I'm not going to introduce the panelists. I'm simply going to pass the mic. I'm going to ask all the panelists to simply just going to go right down the row and to ask each of them to introduce themselves. So it's my proud honor to pass to my colleague in the who I was working with during the judging, Paul Rodriguez.
Hi, my name is Paul Rodriguez. I am the Natural Language Processing Science Director at Accenture Federal Services. I've been at the company for about 3 years. Before going to the company, I was a research scientist here at the University of Maryland in the Applied Research Laboratory for Intelligence and Security. Before that, the Center for Advanced Study of Language.
Hi, my name is Betsy Jayasuriya, and I currently work for the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts. Prior to that, I've held government positions with the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense.
Hi, everybody. My name is Beth St. Jean. I'm an associate professor in the iSchool here, and I teach courses at both the undergraduate level and also courses in our MLIS program, the Library and Information Science program. So I may have had you or will have you in INST 352 user information needs and assessment.
Hello and good afternoon. My name is Ian Page. My pronouns are he and him. I am a University of Maryland alumni as well as the current associate director for the FIRE program here at University of Maryland, which gets undergrads involved in research all across campus.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leah Dickerson. I am a senior librarian for taxonomy and research at the U.S. Government Accountability Office, which is the United States government's Supreme Audit Institution, or colloquially known as the Watchdog. I've been there for almost 13 years, and I joined there while as a grad student here at the iSchool.
Good afternoon. My name is Gavin Taylor. I'm a professor of computer science at the U.S. Naval Academy. I specialize in reinforcement learning, neural networks, and I am the chair of the data science effort at the Naval Academy.
The flaw in that process was the microphone kept going farther and farther away from me. So this is an opportunity for you all to ask any questions that you would like. But I'm going to give you just a little bit of time to think about the questions that you have by asking the first question. I'm going to pass the mic down and I'm going to ask this first question. And the question would be any advice that members of the panel have towards you who are in the process of beginning your careers in information science and data science, of what a little bit of advice that they have to give to you all. So I'll start with Ms. Rodriguez.
Thank you. And one of the problems being stage left on the participant panel, you always get that questions asked first. So at Accenture, I help manage a team of 700 data scientists, data engineers, and data visualization specialists. And I manage internally, which is a little bit weird for a consulting organization. And I've done over 200 interviews over the past 3 years. And one of the things that I realized very quickly, everyone's coming into this area from different backgrounds. Everyone's coming in and we're all learning the same things at the same time. But you have this interesting thing in the data science area in that you can bring in your backgrounds and your passions and not just work on data as a data problem, but you can work on data within the field of your choice. So you could focus on a technology, but you can also focus on a particular application area or a particular domain of work. When you're working on data science, don't just think of it as a data problem.
I would say the advice that I have is to keep an open mind. You may think that you have an idea right now of what you're going to do with your data science experience and your data science degree, but you may not have really any idea where your experience could lead you. I could not have told you 20 years ago that I would end up, a government information specialist, but as it is, I've worked in university libraries, corporate libraries, government libraries, and relevant to data and data science, I'm mostly a consumer, which makes being here particularly fascinating. But don't be too hyper-focused on what you think you're going to do with your data science experience. Keep an open mind.
Great. Thank you. I guess I have two things. One is a piece of advice I was given as an undergraduate, and it's really, I found it helpful throughout my career. And that was always remember that you're an applicant, you're not a supplicant. And I thought that's really helpful. You're bringing really important skills that are going to help your company, your agency, whatever it is, wherever it is you're applying to. The other piece of advice is I would recommend, I encourage you not to be afraid of shaping jobs into something that you enjoy and you're feeling like you're making the best contribution that you can make. Because sometimes you'll be asked to do things because the people asking you to do them don't know enough about what you're doing to be able to ask you what actually could help them the most, if that makes sense. And so, but you often have a lot more knowledge coming right out of school where you can be like, yeah, I see what you're asking, but you know what? There's this other really cool thing. How about this? So I would definitely encourage you to, go beyond what people are asking and offer added value that you can definitely bring to your positions and shape your positions into something that you enjoy and can contribute the best way that you can.
So many of you in the room are early career data scientists, but the advice I have for you is actually true whether you're early, mid, or late career. And that is, when you're analyzing data, remember your audience. And what I mean by that is, don't forget that when you're putting together your analysis, someone who's not you needs to look at it and be able to make sense of it. And that is hypercritical for you in terms of your success as a data scientist, as a professional, in terms of the product you're putting out there. There's no clear, I think what we can all appreciate from a week-long data challenge is there's no clear roadmap for how do I take this data set and put it into some meaningful analysis. That's a super specific skill set that is very relevant, very important, and we're all working on that. What I encourage you to also remember, hand in hand with that is, as a data scientist, as an analyst, your responsibility is also to be a storyteller, to take numbers, to take data, even qualitative data as well, and produce products, visualizations, numerical reports that help people make sense of the data that you were given. And part of helping people make sense of it isn't just the actual graph. It's the story you build around the graph. It's the progression of going from one graph to the other so that people understand the overarching trends that you're seeing in the data, and they follow you as you go through the conclusions. It is the most important skill I think you can get.
All right. I want to touch upon, I think, a theme that several other people have mentioned, but kind of solidified a little bit. As a data scientist, you will have your specific perspective, but more likely than not, when you're entering the workplace or entering on a project, you'll be working with other professionals. You might be working with an attorney. You might be working with a statistician. You might be working with, just a program officer. So you have to learn how to work with other professionals in a team environment in order to achieve your goal. I think this has been touched upon. People will have different perspectives. There'll be different audiences for your work. So you have to learn how to be able to speak, accurately and correctly to what you're doing, what analysis you're working on, while still making it accessible to your colleagues coming from different areas and making sure you're meeting their needs. So I would definitely emphasize that, and learning how to translate the technical to the layperson who's another professional. And also, on the flip side, if you're working with an attorney or if you're working with someone else who's a specialist in their area and you need to elicit information from them, learn how to meet them in the middle and translate their technical knowledge to what you need to know to do your job.
I would suggest that you should work hard to cultivate and lean into and draw confidence from the things that make you different. In other words, that it can be very easy, for example, when you're first starting out, maybe you find yourself in a very technical job surrounded by technical people. And a lot of those people may have a lot of skills that you don't have. But maybe you're the better statistician, or you're the better communicator, or you're the better writer, or the better presenter. And so the fact that you have, there's two ways of looking at it when that happens. One way is to say, I'm not as good as these other people at this thing that seems to be our job. Or you could say, I'm the person who gets to bring a unique set of things and perhaps contributes the most to the project. And so I really recommend trying to be the different person in the room.
If you can hear me, so if this is to work very well, this presentation time is your time. I would add to the excellent comments you just heard, my piece of advice would be to be bold and ask questions. And that's a good thing to do right now. We have two microphones, one on this side and one on that side. So if any of you have a question that you'd like to ask the members of the panel, it can be an individual, you can ask the whole panel. Any thought you have on, or any questions you have. Many of you, almost all of you, have been in teams being asked questions by judges earlier today. So this is your turn to ask the panel member questions of any that you'd like. So who would like to ask the first question? Come on up. And if you'd like, whoever else has a question, if you can just come stand at this, and then at some point, just make your way up as you can. Right. And thank you. Thanks for being bold and asking the first question.
This is going towards the entire panel, kind of expanding on Gavin's response. What would you say, especially as somebody who's just recently come into the data science field, what are some skills that we should be building to kind of set ourselves apart? What are, would you say, the kind of key, the important skills that we need to have as data scientists?
I think I might have a disappointing answer for you, which is that I don't think I should answer that. And the reason is because if you are, for all the reasons I just said, right, we all know there are many, many, many different angles to being a good data scientist. There's computational skills, there's statistical skills, there's creative data processing skills, there's the communication, there's the writing, there's the speaking. None of us can be awesome at all of that. But somebody in the room should be good at each part of that. And so that was really where, I mentioned sort of cultivating the thing that you're good at. I would say identifying the part of that pie, which is your piece that you can really lean into, is the chance to make some really exciting contributions to the team.
Okay, I guess I have a different answer, and this is purely born out of the institution that I work for. In GAO, we're auditors. We are looking at what might be wrong or how things could be improved, right? So there's this term that we talk about is like professional skepticism, right? Having this honed in way of asking questions, looking at evidence, looking at data, to not take everything for what it is right in front of you, right? To kind of think about it and kind of take it in a certain way. So I would say developing your own professional skepticism through whatever type of skills that Gavin just mentioned, like that you're really good at writing. So, okay, write in a way that reveals maybe some issues with the data and like be very good at explaining that. Maybe it's coding and you're able to deal with, quality issues and explore that very well with your data. So I think developing that sense of professional skepticism, no matter what type of work you're working on, is going to serve you well.
Do you want us all to answer? I don't mean to.
Oh,
I'm happy to
had
talk
no
more.
idea.
I thought it was a great question. And I'm really glad you asked that information. And Gavin, I loved the answer too, because I thought, I wish I had thought of that one. But clearly you thinking of that one was your strength, not mine. I think, but I kind of agree too with the spirit of what you both said. And I'll simply add, it's one of those things that really can't be answered necessarily. I think what you need to think about is what is it about doing this kind of work or this kind of research that you get especially excited about and passionate about? Where do you find meaning and flow? And that's going to be your strong suit. That's where you're going to be able to like enjoy and ultimately find, hey, I actually have a comparative advantage relative to the other people I work with. And what gets you going is not going to be the same thing that other people are as excited about or passionate about or as skilled at. And so everybody in this room, we're all super different, unique people, which is fantastic, and it's our strength. And that's why I think it can't be cleanly answered to say definitively like this is going to be your edge, because your edge is going to be the things that you're most excited about, I think.
Thank you. Excuse me. I'm definitely not a data scientist, but I think my belief on this would be that it's what you enjoy that you delve into and you become an expert on. I think that keeping it, as other people have mentioned, keeping in mind what you're doing, why are you doing it, who are you doing it for, what are that person's needs, even if they're not the express needs, that sometimes you can tell there's needs beyond what somebody can express, and I think that's important. And the last thing I'll just mention is there's a really important, I think, ethical dimension, because there's definitely ways to manipulate data and make it look like the story is X when the story is really Y. And so just keeping in mind the ethical implications, I think, is really important.
So, going first is hard and going last is hard too. We talked about passions, we talked about finding your skill set. We all need a foundation and knowing how to implement good science. So asking questions, the right questions, looking for gaps. But you also have to understand that in this field, it's going to be a lifelong pursuit. You're going to have to keep learning. You need to learn how to learn because new techniques are going to come out all the time. New methodologies are going to come out. New tools are going to come out. And you have to be adaptable after you have that base.
Thank you very much. That was actually kind of what I was hoping for, getting a different perspective from everybody.
So that was an excellent question. Another question?
I really appreciate the wide variety of people that are here on the stage. I mean, that computer science to very qualitative health sciences, there's this wide range of people. I work with students on a regular basis, and I really hype them up on information science broadly. And I very often have a lot of them that say, I can't do that because I don't code. I'm not super at math. What do you have to say to these students that feel intimidated because they are not coming from the coding and math side, but are interested in this information side?
So I am a perfect example of that. So I So I'm a research librarian by training. I've kind of later on in my career fallen into taxonomy, ontology, etc. stuff. And I work alongside a great number of people who are much more technical than I am, like economists and statisticians and data analysts, actuaries. So I would say for those of you who are maybe in my boat where you might have a little coding experience or more ancillary skill sets, don't be intimidated by it because you have something to contribute. As librarians, we have the ability to help people identify data. We have the ability to help people give context to their data. Are there quality issues known with the data? Are there, attributes that aren't collected in the data set right now that people are talking about that should be collected? Those are all types of things that I can help my colleagues with and bring to the table. I would also say if you don't plan on learning code, but you still want to be involved, there are other ways that you can, learn about the issue and kind of bring things to the table. You can, learn about data catalogs and help people find and identify data. You can, the ethics, that Beth brought up, the ethical issues. You can be well educated in that. You can describe data sets. There's so many different things related to just like the data part of it that are kind of happen all around the coding and the, really in the weeds synthesis that sometimes maybe gets devalued or less emphasized, but it's just as critically important. And you definitely should see yourself as a key stakeholder and a key team member in that work. So and even if you do want to code and you're intimidated, you just start easy. You find something that you can latch onto. Like for me now, it's taxonomies and ontologies. Like I really understand it and I really love it. So that's going to be an entry point for me to get my knowledge up, ramp up my knowledge in Python. So there are tons of different libraries and tons of different issues. Find something that you can latch onto as well if you do want to code and try to use that as an entry point.
Thank you. Great question. Wow. And great answer, too. This is fantastic. So I think what a real strength of information science is bringing you probably all have seen the three rings that interlink, and there's like people, information, and technology. And a real strength of information science, and all of you who are pursuing information science, is really understanding that intersection, that interface between people, information, and technology. Those are really super important skills. My wife works in information technology, has forever, and she has so many colleagues that are great at the tech, but they don't understand the people part. And that's a huge gap, a really important gap that you guys are going to be able to help fulfill.
So earlier I mentioned I work in a division with 700 people, and they all have different focus areas, and teams can form around individual specializations to solve different problems each time. There are lots of different backgrounds that you can bring into this field. And data visualization and the ability to tell stories around the data is one of them. So if you're not a good programmer, you might be a good designer. Likewise, I can't design anything, but I'm a decent programmer.
Sean.
I might just very briefly add, so coming from the technical side, right? So I'm a computer scientist and a mathematician. I recently worked on a project where I work for the Navy. I made a friend who flies through hurricanes for a living. It's awesome. And so she has all these sensors hanging off her plane, and she flies through hurricanes so that they can try and understand how hurricanes behave. And she wanted to do a machine learning project on this. And she called me in, and I was of no use because I don't know anything about hurricanes. Right? So having the technical background doesn't mean that you can solve all these problems, right? Well, you have to have somebody in the room who can help connect those dots. And so we needed somebody who had focused on something other than what I had focused on so that we could do something in that project. So.
Because the field is evolving with information and data so rapidly, where are places that you go that are not related to where you work or your colleagues to stay current, to stay up to date on what's going on in the fields and in the trend? And if I may ask, what's one area that's specific for data information and what's something that's not?
Personally, so in my field of natural language processing in 2018, everything changed. If you went to school earlier than that, you learned statistical natural language processing. It worked very well. There were problems, but every new project that you started, it was a very similar workflow. After 2018, everyone had to retrain themselves. Because the state-of-the-art models were now using neural technologies. The neural technologies when I was in school just couldn't do real natural language processing. They could model the capabilities of an infant, and that's how they framed the class. And so now every month there's a new state-of-the-art model that has come out. So I monitor, archive to at least skim the new papers that come out in my field each day. That takes time. But every time I begin a new project within a particular domain area, I can go pull those papers that are most relevant to that project. And so it's an act of querying for that particular project, but also going to benchmarks. In the field of machine learning, there's been this tendency to create these leaderboard systems that on common data sets where people can compete, build the best algorithms for a particular type of problem. And so if I'll just come out with some resources, paperswithcode.com, tries to cover all of artificial intelligence. If you are working on natural language processing, you would probably go to something like Superglue. But even particular types of problems have their own data sets as well, like Stanford's question answering data set, where algorithms compete to be higher on that leaderboard.
Okay, we'll go next. So librarian here. So I will say I use Twitter a lot. Twitter I find to be really great. Maybe I'll be browsing papers and say, oh, this author looks interesting, and I'll start following them. So it's just a really great way of finding postings about conferences or just different articles they find interesting. So I like that a lot, finding specific scholars that I'm interested in, just following them on Twitter. Another thing I do is read news, and this I do get through my subscription at work, but there are other ways to get information. I do follow tech policy, just out of more personal interest than specific to my work, but I do think it's good situational awareness, kind of going back to some issues about ethics and just kind of a policy environment. And I think it gives you kind of an intellectual framework of what kind of environment you're working in when it comes to the work that you're doing. So there are definitely news sources like New York Times, Politico, depending on where you want to look, or really comprehensive blogs like TechCrunch that cover the policy aspect of tech work and data science that might be something you might want to follow as well, just to kind of get both sides of the coin, the technical aspect and the policy aspect.
So, social scientist here, actually, and I'm gonna buck the trend and give a social answer. I don't have any specific resources to recommend for you. What I have is just philosophy. Have a social network of peers, colleagues, coworkers, other professionals that are either directly in your field or just people you kind of click with and you're able to speak the same language on some of these things. There are so many resources out there, you're not gonna be able to read them all. And what resources are the best resources or the most helpful resources will change over time. If you have a network, small, maybe you meet for coffee or lunch, or big, and maybe you meet for dinner like once a month or whatever, you have people. And you're going to be on top of some stuff because it's just kind of what made your radar, and they're going to have stuff that they're interested in and passionate about and working on right now, and it's going to make their radar. And you get to talk shop sometimes and hear what other people are working on, and that kind of will help you keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on. And it's not something you have to do all by yourself.
Similarly, as a social scientist, not a data analyst, but I think a lot of my keeping up is actually just looking at what is going on in the world. So my specific area, I study people's health-related information needs and how they go about getting those met, and also how not getting those met can lead to health disparities. So I study an area called health justice. And just watching what's going on in the news actually helps me a lot to really understand what's going on and how we might help people and make the world a more just place where everybody can, live a long and healthy life as far as possible.
So some folks have just walked into the room or in the last few minutes. What we're doing is asking the questions of the panel. And so anyone who has a question for the panel, please step up to either this microphone here or this microphone here. And seeing no one right now, while you're making your way up to the microphone, I'll ask a question that I often hear, which is just your thoughts, and maybe start with you, it's the question of like whether to go on to graduate school or go into the professional career, that kind of thinking. If you had that experience of like wondering what to do and how you answered that question. Does that question make sense?
Yes. I mean, as a librarian, the question of whether to go on to graduate school was pre-decided. If I wanted to be a librarian, I had to go on to graduate school. Many of you are lucky in that you can have, undergraduate credentials and go on to a career in data science. And I would say explore, before you make a decision like that, explore the options that are going to be available to you at each level. There may be a compelling reason to go on to graduate school, but there may not. Don't make a decision out of a knee-jerk predisposition.
Grad school isn't for everybody. And it does depend on your department as well. If you wanted to focus on your data science application into a particular area and become a subject matter expert within that area that's able to leverage the analysis of data, that's fantastic. But it does require a long-term commitment. It requires a personal sacrifice on earning opportunity in many of the disciplines, but it's mainly the time. That being said, if you want to reach for the latest methods, develop the newest methods that solve problems that haven't been solved yet, that graduate education could be very, very helpful.
Okay, I'll quickly say, librarian here. So getting the master's was something I needed to do, but I did take 2 years off after undergrad before going to grad school, which I found incredibly valuable. Just being in the workplace, having a standard routine, and experiencing my field as a library assistant it dispelled of the notion that I wanted to become a law librarian, which was really helpful for me before going to grad school. So if you do see grad school in your future, that the timeline can be variant for you. You can, take time in the workplace, kind of decide maybe something isn't for you or is for you, and then use that as a way to pivot to grad school.
Man, this question just brings back so many bad memories about grad school. I need a therapy session after this. Grad school is super duper hard. And one of the reasons I think it can be hard is, so many of you are somewhere in the process of completing your undergraduate degree. And I think it's important to recognize thus far in life, you've been on a very clear path, a track. And that's not to say that hasn't been challenging. It definitely has been. And for some people, it's been especially challenging to make it this far. I have found, when I went to grad school and was surrounded by other people who had made the similar decision to go to grad school, some of us, to a certain extent myself included, made the decision to go to grad school because it was an easy decision to make, because we'd been professional students for so long. Because it was what we knew, and we knew, we're good at school. We're good at going to a class, pursuing a subject, taking classes, checking boxes, and getting a degree. I'm just gonna go get the next degree. And taking a break, or at least doing something where you figure out, if I go to grad school, what does that degree actually afford me, is hypercritical. So it's not just a question of should you go to grad school, but if you go to grad school, what doors does that open for you? And it is a big commitment, and there are sacrifices there, and so you do lose some stuff by making those decisions. Sometimes that puts you on a different pathway. Maybe you go and do a professional master's or a master's with a thesis, or you jump right into a PhD. All of those can be phenomenal experiences, and as much as I do like to joke and be like, it was very hard, because it was very hard, it's the right decision for many, many people. But I think for anyone in this room considering an advanced degree, make sure when you're making that decision, you understand what you're actually going to get out of it. And if that means taking time and having a job immediately after you graduate and getting a sense of that industry and what pathways that opens, definitely do that.
So thank you. Pretty similarly for me, I was driven by what I wanted to do at the time. So I got my undergraduate degree in math. I'm not going to say when, long time ago. And for a very long time, I worked in accounting jobs because that's who would hire me. I hated accounting. It was so boring. And I finally landed a really nice job working for an expert witness in economics and started doing research and found I really love this. And so to me, at that point, I realized that I'm not going to be able to go further with my math undergrad degree in this track. And so that's why I actually went to get my master's in library and information science, just because I love that research piece. And and then so I went back to graduate school. How much later? 1988, sorry, 2004. So 16 years later.
So my students ask me this question all the time, and I never actually know if my perspective has a whole lot of value, because I've never left the comforting embrace of academia myself. So I went directly from undergrad into grad school into being a professor. I'll say that I went into graduate school because the job that I wanted required it. So I wanted to be a university professor. I wanted to have students, and I wanted to have research on the side, and I wouldn't get to do that any other way. I'll also add that while graduate school is very hard, there are some unbelievable joys along the way, right? So the experience of going into a top-tier conference and telling an expert in your field something they didn't know is an unbelievable experience. So I don't know that I'm very good at weighing one of these options versus the other, but I'll say that the job I wanted and the job that I love required it. And so, and I didn't hate it while I've been doing it, because it has some additional benefits along the way.
I already answered the question, but I just thought of something. I fully intended to stop after my master's. I enjoyed it so much, I couldn't bear to leave before finishing the PhD. Well, after I finished all my coursework, I was staring at the possibility of writing a 250-page dissertation, and I couldn't bear to work on the dissertation. And then I couldn't bear not to get the PhD. And I finished the dissertation, I defended the dissertation, and I got the PhD. I wouldn't have had the career path that I've had I not finished. This wasn't the intended career path. I'm glad I tried grad school. I'm certainly glad I finished.
So I believe that concludes, I'm sorry, we have a question.
As someone who's not studying information science, what would you consider the most basic thing that you think everyone should have as a general perspective regarding information science?
The ability to identify what questions could be answered from a data set, and the hesitancy to trust any end result, any analysis, any visual representation, without the understanding of what could have driven that production.
Thank you. Wow, this is a great question. I think my answer would be how centrally important information is to justice of whatever kind. Without information, you're at such a severe disadvantage, and even worse so with misinformation. So, yeah, I think that would be mine.
I might just say, so I sort of have two very competing answers here. One of them is respect for evidence, right? The whole reason why we do this, I think, is because people should oftentimes make decisions based off of evidence. But you should also be a critical thinker about the evidence that's in front of you. So make sure you think hard about whether the conclusions that you're drawing are actually valid. So those are my two conflicting things. We should want to base decisions off of evidence whenever possible, but we should be suspicious of the evidence that's in front of us.
And that excellent question concludes the panel question and answer. Let's have a great round of applause for our panel. And we are now going to conclude with the award ceremony.